YouTube. Let's go over here. YouTube. Let's go find my channel. Let's see about my YouTube. I get this one going. Okay, that's copied in. Let's go over here and hit Twitter. Alright, let's see here. Now, back to my Streamlabs feed. Ooh. That's not right. That's a little better. Okay, I understand now. All right. So, I'm about 9 minutes out from reading the first chapter, or first official chapter of the book Lone Survivor. This book is by a fellow Texan, true patriot, real badass, Navy SEAL, Marcus Luttrell. I am not doing this to try and take money or bust his copyright. I will only be reading one chapter. These are not my words, they are his words. But they are the most applicable that I could find for Memorial Day. Who we should be honoring and remembering on Memorial Day. So, they asked me to take this down later on. I gladly 100% will. There's not even a question. Again, I am only going to be reading a first chapter. You're not going to get any action. Well, if you're former military and you've ever been on a C-130, yeah, you're going to feel some of that action. But just being honest. This is how I spent my Memorial Day, and thought I would share. Again, it's only going to be a one chapter. And should you be looking for this book, please go buy it. It's definitely worth the read. I've read it several times already. I chose the first chapter because certain parts of this book really get to me. And I'm not going to try and read those sections. It's very moving, very powerful story, and I think most Americans will appreciate it. Well, most real Americans. Anyways, I'm going to light my pipe. Sorry about the view right here for a second. By the way, if you're under the age of going into the military, I'm smoking a pipe full of tobacco. This video is not intended for you. Get your parents' permission and come on back. So we're about 5 minutes out now. I'm going to apologize for some of the sound effects that you can probably hear. I see some police or fire sirens. I believe they are an ambulance. Next year, I'm going to try for one chapter of a book by a different Texan. A year after that, I believe I'm going to try for a book from West Virginia. And then maybe another book from West Virginia. For those trying to keep track, that would be one Chris Kyle, and possibly the greatest sniper that America has ever had, Mr. Whitefeather himself. And then first man to break the sound barrier and live to tell about it, Mr. Chuck Yeager. That should give me a couple of years to figure out who to go reading after that. Anyways, we're within 60 seconds of starting this show. This is live. I apologize if I get some words wrong or mispronounced or get a little tongue-tied. Not the greatest at this. Again, this is just a tribute. To Afghanistan in a flying warehouse. This was payback time for the World Trade Center. We were coming after the guys who did it. If not the actual guys, then their blood brothers. The lunatics who still wished us dead and might try it again. Goodbyes tend to be curt among Navy SEALs. A quick backslap, a friendly bear hug. No one uttering what we're all thinking. Here we go again. Guys, going to war, to another trouble spot, another half-assed enemy willing to try their luck against us. They must be out of their minds. It's a SEAL thing, our unspoken invincibility, the silent code of the elite warrior of the United States Armed Forces. Big, fast, highly trained guys, armed to the teeth, expert in unarmed combat, so stealthy no one ever hears us coming. SEALs are masters of strategy, professional marksmen with rifles, artists with machine guns, and if necessary, pretty handy with knives. In general terms, we believe there are very few of the world problems that we could not solve with high explosives or a well-aimed bullet. We operate on sea, air, and land. That's where we got our name. U.S. Navy SEALs. Underwater, on the water, or out of the water. Man, we can do it all. And where we were going, it was likely to be strictly out of the water. Way out of the water. 10,000 feet up some treeless moonscape of a mountain range in one of the loneliest and sometimes most lawless places in the world. Afghanistan. Bye, Marcus. Good luck, Mikey. Take it easy, Matt. See you later, guys. I remember it like it was yesterday. Someone pulling open the doors to our barracks room, the light spilling out into the warm, dark night of Bahrain. This strange desert kingdom, which is joined to Saudi Arabia by the 2-mile-long King Fahd Causeway. The 6 of us, dressed in our light combat gear, flat desert khakis with Oakley assault boots, stepped out into the light, warm breeze. It was March 2005. Not yet hotter than hell, like it is in summer, but still unusually warm for a group of Americans in springtime, even for a Texan like me. Bahrain stands on the 26-degree north line of latitude. That's more than 400 miles to the south of Baghdad. And that's hot. Our particular unit was situated on the south side of the capital of Manama, way up in the way up in the northeast corner of the island. This meant we had to be transported right through the middle of town to the U.S. Air Base in Muharraq Island for all flights to and from Bahrain. We didn't mind this, but we didn't love it either. That little journey, maybe 5 miles, took us through a city that felt much as we did. The locals didn't love us either. There was kind of sullen look to them, as if they were sick to death of having the American military around them. In fact, there were districts in Manama known as Black Flag areas, where tradesmen, shopkeepers, and private citizens hung black flags outside of their properties to signify Americans are not welcome. I guess it wasn't quite as vicious as Judenverboten was in Hitler's Germany, but there are undercurrents of hatred all over the Arab world, and we knew there were many sympathizers with the Muslim extremist fanatics of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. The black flag worked. We stayed well clear of those places. Nonetheless, we had to drive through the city in an unprotected vehicle over another causeway, the Sheikh Hamad, named for the emir. They're big on causeways, and I guess they will build more, since there are 32 other smaller islands forming the low-lying Bahrainian archipelago right off the Saudi western shore in the Gulf of Iran. Anyway, we drove on through Manama out to Muharraq, where the U.S. Air Base lies to the south of the main Bahrain International Airport. Awaiting us was a huge C-130 Hercules, a giant turboprop freighter. It's one of the noisiest aircraft in the stratosphere, a big, echoing steel cave specifically designed to carry heavy-duty freight, not sensitive, delicate, poetic conversationalists such as ourselves. We loaded and stowed our essential equipment, heavy weapons, machine guns, M4 rifles, Sig Sauer 9mm pistols, pig stickers, combat knives, ammunition belts, grenades, medical and communication gear. A couple of the guys slung up hammocks made of thick netting. The rest of us settled back into seats that were also made of netting. Business class this wasn't. But frogs don't travel light, and they don't expect comfort. That's frogmen, by the way, which we all were. Stuck here in this flying warehouse, this utterly primitive form of passenger transportation, there was a certain amount of cheerful griping and moaning. But if the 6 of us were inserted into some hellhole of a battleground, soaking wet, freezing cold, wounded, trapped, outnumbered, fighting for our lives, you would not hear one solitary word of complaint. That's the way of our brotherhood. It's a strictly American brotherhood, mostly forged in blood, hard-won, unbreakable, built on a shared patriotism, shared courage, and shared trust in one another. There is no fighting force in the world quite like us. The flight crew checked We were all strapped in, and then those thunderous Boeing engines roared. Jesus, the noise was unbelievable. I might just as well have been sitting in the gearbox. The whole aircraft shook and rumbled as we charged down the runway, taking off to the southwest, directly into the desert wind, which gusted out of the mainland Arabian Peninsula. There were no other passengers on board, just the flight crew, and in the rear, us, headed out to do God's work on behalf of the U.S. government and our Commander-in-Chief, President George W. Bush. In a sense, we were all alone, as usual. We banked out over the Gulf of Bahrain and made a long left-hand swing into our easterly course. It would have been a whole hell of a lot quicker to head directly northeast across the Gulf, but that would have taken us over the dubious southern uplands of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and we do not do that. Instead, we stayed south, flying high over the friendly coastal deserts of the United Arab Emirates. North of the burning sands of the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter, astern of us lay the fevered cauldrons of loathing in Iraq and nearby Kuwait, places where I had previously served. Below us were the more friendly, enlightened desert kingdoms of the world's coming natural gas capital, Qatar, the oil-sodden emirate of Abu Dhabi, the gleaming modern high-rises of Dubai, and then farther east, the craggy coastline of Oman. None of us were especially sad to leave Bahrain, which was the first place in the Middle East where oil was discovered. It had its history, and we often had fun in the local markets, bargaining with local merchants for everything. But we never felt at home there. And somehow, as we climbed into the dark skies, we felt we were leaving behind all that was god-awful in the northern reaches of the Gulf, and embarking on a brand new mission, one that we understood. In Baghdad, we were up against an enemy we often could not see and were obliged to get out there and find. And when we found him, we scarcely knew who he was. Al-Qaeda or Taliban, Shiite or Sunni, Iraqi or foreign, a freedom fighter for Saddam, or an insurgent fighting for some kind of a different god from our own, a god who somehow sanctioned murder of innocent civilians, a god who'd effectively booted the Ten Commandments over the touchline and out of play. They were ever present, ever dangerous, giving us a clear pattern of total confusion, if you know what I mean. Somehow, shifting positions in the big Hercules freighter, we were leaving behind a place which was systematically tearing itself apart and heading for a place full of wild mountain men who were hell-bent on tearing us apart. Afghanistan. This was very different. Those mountains up in the northeast, the western end of the mighty range of the Hindu Kush, were the very same mountains where the Taliban had sheltered the lunatics of Al-Qaeda, shielded the crazed followers of Osama bin Laden, while they plotted the attacks of the World Trade Center in New York on 9/11. This was where bin Laden's fighters found a home training base. Let's face it, Al-Qaeda means the base. And in return for the Saudi fanatics, bin Laden's money, the Taliban made it all possible. Right now, these very same guys, the remnants of the Taliban, and the last few tribal warriors of Al-Qaeda, were preparing to start over, trying to fight their way through the mountain passes, intent on setting up new training camps and military headquarters, and eventually their own government in place of the democratically elected one. They may not have been the precise same guys who planned 9/11, but they were certainly their descendants, their heirs, their followers. They were part of the same crowd who knocked down the North and South Towers in the Big Apple on that infamous Tuesday morning in 2001. And our coming task was to stop them, right there in those mountains by whatever means necessary. Thus far, those mountain men had been kicking some serious ass in their skirmishes with our military, which was more or less why the brass had sent for us. When things get very rough, they usually send for us. That's why the Navy spends years training SEALs teams in Coronado, California, and Virginia Beach. Especially for times like these, when Uncle Sam's velvet glove makes way for the iron fist of SPECWARCOM. That's Special Forces Command. And that was why all of us were here. Our mission may have been strategic. It may have been secret. However, one point was crystalline clear, at least to the 6 SEALs in that rumbling Hercules, high above the Arabian desert. This was payback. This was payback time for the World Trade Center. We were coming after the guys who did it. If not the actual guys, then their blood brothers. The lunatics who still wished us dead and might try it again. Same thing, right? We knew what we were coming for, and we knew where we were going. Right up there to the high peaks of the Hindu Kush. Those same mountains where bin Laden might still be, and where his brand new bands of disciples were still hiding somewhere. The pure clarity of purpose was inspirational to us. Gone were the treacherous, dusty black streets of Baghdad. Gone were the treacherous, dusty back streets of Baghdad, where even children of 3 and 4 were taught to hate us. Dead ahead in Afghanistan awaited an ancient battleground where we could match our enemy, strength for strength, stealth for stealth, steel for steel. This might be perhaps a little daunting for regular soldiers, but not for SEALs. And I can state with absolute certainty that all 6 of us were excited by the prospect, looking forward to doing our job out there in the open, confident of our ultimate success, sure of our training, experience, and judgment. You see, we're invincible. That's what they taught us. That's what we believe. It's written right there in black and white in the official philosophy of the U.S. Navy SEAL. The last 2 paragraphs of which read, "We train for war and fight to win. I stand ready to bring the full spectrum of combat power to bear in order to achieve my mission and the goals established by my country. The execution of my duties will be swift and violent when required, yet guided by the very principles I serve to defend. Brave men who have fought and died, building the proud tradition and feared reputation that I am bound to uphold. In the worst of conditions, the legacy of my teammates steadies my resolve and silently guides my every deed. I will not fail." Each one of us had grown a beard in order to look more like Afghan fighters. It was important for us to appear non-military, to not stand out in a crowd. Despite this, I can guarantee you that if 3 SEALs were put into a crowded airport, I would spot them all just by their bearing, their confidence, their obvious discipline, the way they walk. I'm not saying anyone else could recognize them, but I most certainly could. The guys who traveled from Bahrain with me were remarkably diverse, even by SEAL standards. There was SGT-2 Matthew Gene Axelson, not yet 30, a petty officer from California, married to Cindy, devoted to her and to his parents, Cordell and Donna, and to his brother Jeff. I always called him Axe. I knew him well. My twin brother Morgan was his best friend. He'd been to our home in Texas, and he and I had been together for a long time in SEAL Delivery Vehicle Team 1, Alpha Platoon. He and Morgan were swim buddies together in SEAL training, went through sniper school together. Axe was a quiet man, 6'4", with piercing blue eyes and curly hair. He was smart and the best Trivial Pursuit player I ever saw. I loved talking to him because of how much he knew. He would come out with answers that would have defied the learning of a Harvard professor. Places, countries, their populations, principal industries. In the teams, he was always professional. I never once saw him upset. He always knew precisely what he was doing. He was just one of those guys. What was difficult and confusing for others was usually a piece of cake for him. In combat, he was a supreme athlete, swift, violent, brutal if necessary. His family never knew that side of him. They saw only the calm, cheerful Navy man who could undoubtedly have been a professional golfer, a guy who loved a laugh and a cold beer. You could hardly meet a better person. He was an incredible man. Then there was my best friend, Lieutenant Michael Patrick Murphy, also not yet 30, an honors graduate from Penn State, a hockey player, accepted by several law schools before he turned the rudder hard over and changed course for the United States Navy. Mikey was an inveterate reader. His favorite book was Stephen Pressfield's Gates of Fire, the story of the immortal stand of the Spartans at Thermopylae. He was vastly experienced in the Middle East, having served in Jordan, Qatar, and Djibouti, on the Horn of Africa. We started our careers as SEALs at the same time, and we were probably flung together by our shared devotion to the smart-ass remark. Also, neither of us could sleep if we were under the slightest pressure. Our insomnia was shared like our humor. We used to hang out together half the night, and I can truthfully say no one ever made me laugh like that. I was always razzing him about being dirty. We'd sometimes go out on patrol every day for weeks, and there seems to be no time to shower and no point in showering when you're likely to be up to your armpits in swamp water a few hours later. Here's a typical exchange between us. Petty officer leader to commissioned SEAL officer. Mikey, you smell like shit, for Christ's sake. Why the hell don't you take a shower? Right away, Marcus. Remind me to do that tomorrow, will you? Roger that, sir. For his nearest and dearest, he used a particularly large gift shop, otherwise known as the U.S. Highway System. I remember him giving his very beautiful girlfriend, Heather, a gift-wrapped traffic cone for her birthday. For Christmas, he gave her one of those flashing red lights which fit on top of those cones at night. Gift-wrapped, of course. He once gave me a stop sign for my birthday, and you should have seen his traveling bag. It was enormous, a big, cavernous hockey duffel bag, the kind carried by his favorite team, the New York Rangers. the single heaviest piece of luggage in the entire Navy, but it didn't sport the Rangers logo. On its top were two simple words: piss off. There was no situation for which he could not summon a really smart-ass remark. Mikey was once involved in a terrible accident, almost fatal accident, and one of the guys asked him to explain what happened. "Come on," said the New York lieutenant, as if it were a subject of which we were profoundly wary. "You're always bringing up that old shit. Forget about it." The actual accident had happened just 2 days earlier. He was also the finest officer I ever met, a natural leader, a really terrific SEAL who never ever bossed anyone around. It was always please, always would you mind, never do that, do this. He simply would not tolerate any other high-ranking officer, commissioned or non-commissioned, reaming out one of his guys. He insisted the buck stopped with him. He always took the hit himself. If a reprimand was due, he accepted the blame. But don't even try to go around him and ball out one of his guys, because he could be a formidable adversary when riled, and that always riled him. He was excellent underwater and a powerful swimmer. Trouble was, he was a bit slow, and that was truly his only flaw. One time he and I were on a 2-mile training swim, and when I finally hit the beach, I couldn't find him. Finally, I saw him splashing through the water about 400 yards offshore. Christ, he's in trouble. That was my first thought. So I charged back into the freezing sea and set out to rescue him. I'm not a real fast swimmer, but I'm quick through the water, and I reached him with no trouble. I should have known better. "Get away from me, Marcus," he yelled. "I'm a race car in the red, highest revs on the tack. Don't mess with me. Don't mess with me, Marcus. Not now. You're dealing with a race car here. Only Mike Murphy." If I told that story to any SEAL in our platoon, withheld the name, and then asked who said it, everyone would guess Mikey. Sitting opposite me in the Hercules was Senior Chief Daniel Richard Healy, another awesome Navy SEAL, 6'3", 37, married to Norminda, father of 7 children. He was born in New Hampshire and joined the Navy in 1990, advancing to serve in the SEAL teams and learning near-fluent Russian. Danny and I served in the same team, SDV Team 1, for 3 years. He was a little older than most of us, referred to us as his kids, as if he didn't have enough, and he loved us all with equal passion. Both big families, his wife and children, brothers, sisters, and parents, and the even bigger one hitherto based on the island of Bahrain. Dan was worse than Mikey in his defense of his SEALs. No one ever dared yell at any of us while he was around. He guarded his flock assiduously, reached every mission with complete thoroughness. Researched every mission with complete thoroughness. Gathered the intel, checked the maps, charts, photographs, all reconnaissance. Also, he paid attention to the upcoming missions and made sure his kids were always in the front line. That's the place we were trained for, the place that we like to go. In many ways, Dan was tough on everyone. There were times when he and I did not see eye to eye. He was unfailingly certain that his way was the best way, mostly the only way. But his heart was in the right place at all times. Dan Healy was one hell of a SEAL. a role model for everything a senior chief should be, an Iron Man who became a strategist and who knew his job from A to Z. I talked face to face with Big Dan almost every day of my life. Somewhere up above us, swinging in his hammock, headset on, listening to rock and roll music, was Petty Officer Second Class Shane Patton, 22-year-old surfer and skateboarder, originally from Las Vegas, Nevada, my protege. As the primary communications operator, I had Shane as my number two, like a much younger Mike Murphy. He too was a virtuoso of the smartass remark, and as you would expect, an outstanding frogman. It was hard for me to identify with Shane because he was so different. I once walked into the comm center and he was trying to order a leopard skin coat on the internet. "What the hell do you want that for?" I asked. "It's just so cool, man," he replied, terminating further discussion. A big, robust guy with blonde hair and a relatively insolent grin. Shane was super smart. I never had to tell him anything. He knew what to do at all times. At first, this slightly irritated me. You know, telling a much junior guy what you want done, and it turns out he's already done it every time. Took me a while to get used to the fact that I had an assistant who was damn near as sharp as Matt Axelson. And that's as sharp as it gets. Shane, like a lot of those beach gods, was hugely laid back. His buddies would probably call it super cool or some such word. But in a comms operator, that quality is damn near priceless. If there's a firefight going on and Shane's back at HQ manning the radio, you're listening to one ultra calm, very measured SEAL communicator. Sorry, I meant dude. That was an all-purpose word for Shane. Even I was a dude, according to him. Even the President of the United States was a dude, according to him. Actually, he accorded the President Bush the highest accolade, the gold-plated Congressional Medal of Honor, awarded by the surf gods. He's a real dude, man. A real dude. He was the son of a Navy SEAL, and his quiet, rarely uttered ambition was to be just like his dad, James J. Patton. He wanted to be a member of the Navy jump team, as his father had once been. He completed basic airborne training at Fort Benning, Georgia, before he passed his SEAL qualification exam and accepted orders for SDV Team 1 Alpha Platoon. 5 months later, he joined us on the flight to Afghanistan. Everything Shane did, all through his short life, was outstanding. In high school, he was the star pitcher and the best outfielder. He could play the guitar really well. Ran a band called True Story, the quality of which remains a bit of a mystery. He was a super photographer and a skilled mechanic and engineer. He single-handedly restored and customized 2 old Volkswagen Bugs. He had acquired another one that he told me would become the ultimate customized bug, dude. That's what I'm all about. Shane was as good on a computer as anyone at the base. He spent hours on it, some website called MySpace, always keeping in touch with his friends. "Hey dude, how you been?" The sixth member of our group was James Suh, a 28-year-old native of Chicago who was raised in South Florida. James had been with SDV Team 1 for 3 years before we left for Afghanistan, and during that time he became one of the best-liked guys on the base. He had only one sibling, an older sister, but he had about 300 cousins. every one of whom he was sworn to protect. James, like his close buddy Shane, was another inordinately tough SEAL. Petty officer second class. Like Shane, he'd gone through basic airborne training at Fort Benning and gone forward to join Alpha Platoon. His early ambition had been to become a veterinarian, a dog specialist, but James was born to be a SEAL, and he was passionately proud of his membership in one of the most elite combat outfits in the world, and in his ability to defy the limits of physical and mental endurance. Like Shane, he was a star high school athlete, outstanding on both the swim and tennis teams. Academically, he was constantly in the gifted and advanced classes. In our platoon, James was right up there with Axe and Shane as a SEAL of high intelligence and supreme reliability under fire. I never met one person with a bad word to say about him. It took us almost 3 hours to reach the Gulf of Oman. We'd cut south of the Strait of Hormuz, staying well away from the superhighway of the world oil and gas tankers moving to and from the massive loading docks of the Gulf of Iran. The Iranian Navy does its exercises down there, operating out of their main base in Bandar Abbas, and also farther down the coast at their increasingly active submarine base. Not that we imagine some trigger-happy Iranian missile director might take a pop at us with some fast heat-seeking weapon, but caution was usually advisable around there, despite the fact that we had a very tough man in the White House who'd made clear his policy of harsh retaliation at the merest suggestion of an attack on U.S. air traffic, civilian or military. You had to serve out here in the Middle East to understand fully the feeling of danger, even threat, that was never far away, even in countries generally regarded as friendly to America, like Bahrain. The rugged part of the Omani coast I mentioned earlier is around the point of land at Ras Musaddam, with its deep fjords. This most northerly rocky shelf, which juts into the Gulf of Hormuz, is the closest foreign point to the Iranian base at Bandar Abbas. The stretch of coastline running south from that point is much flatter, sloping down from the ancient Al-Hajar Mountains. We began our long ocean crossing somewhere down there, north of Muscat, close to the Tropic of Cancer. And as we crossed that coastline, heading out towards the open ocean, it really was goodbye, from me at least, to the Arabian Peninsula and the seething Islamic states at the northern end of the Gulf, Kuwait, Iraq, Syria, and Iran, that had dominated my life and thoughts for the last couple of years, especially Iraq. I had first arrived there to join Team 5 back on April 14th, 2003, coming into the U.S. Air Base 15 minutes out of Baghdad with 12 other SEALs from Kuwait in an aircraft just like this C-130. It was 1 week after the U.S. forces launched their opening bombardment against the city, trying to nail Saddam before the war really started. The Brits had just taken Basra. On the same day I arrived, U.S. Marines took Tikrit, Saddam's hometown, and a few hours later the Pentagon announced that major combat had concluded, none of which had the slightest bearing on our mission, which was to help root out, if necessary, destroy what little opposition was left, and then help with the search for weapons of mass destruction. I had been in Baghdad just one day when President Bush declared Saddam Hussein and his Ba'ath Party had fallen, and my colleagues swiftly captured that same day Abu Abbas, leader of the Palestinian Liberation Front, which attacked the Italian cruise ship Achille Lauro in the Mediterranean in 1985. 48 hours later, on April 17th, U.S. forces captured Saddam's half-brother, the infamous Barzam Ibrahim al-Tikriti. Again, I apologize about mangling some of these words. They are not all that easy for someone with yeah, my own learning disorder. It's fine. Okay. Barzan Ibrahim al-Tikriti. That was the kind of stuff I was instantly involved in. I was one of the 146,000 American and coalition troops in there under the command of General Tommy Franks. It was my first experience of close quarter combat. It was a place where I learned the finer points of my trade. It was also the first inkling we had of the rise from the ashes of Osama bin Laden's followers. Sure, we knew they were still around, still trying to regroup after the United States had just about flattened them in Afghanistan. But it was not long before we began to hear of an outfit called Al-Qaeda in Iraq, a malicious terrorist group trying to cause mayhem at every conceivable opportunity. Led by the deranged Jordanian killer Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, Musab, now deceased. Our missions in the city were sometimes interrupted by intense searches for whatever or whoever happened to be missing. On my first day, 4 of us went out to some huge Iraqi lake area looking for a missing F-18 Super Hornet fighter. Excuse me. F-18 Super Hornet fighter bomber and its U.S. pilot. You probably remember the incident. I'll never forget it. We came in low over the lake in our MH-47 Chinook helicopter, and suddenly we spotted the tail of an aircraft jutting out of the water. Right after that, we found the body of the pilot washed up on shore. I remember feeling very sad, and it would not be for the last time. I'd been in the country for less than 24 hours. Attached to Team 5, we were known as strap hangers. Extra muscle, drafted in for particularly dangerous situations. Our primary mission was special surveillance and reconnaissance, photographing hotspots and danger areas using unbelievable photographic lenses. We carried out everything under the cover of darkness, waiting patiently for many hours, watching our backs, keeping our eyes on the target, firing computerized pictures back to base from virtually inside the jaws of the enemy. We worked usually in a very small unit of 4 SEALs, out on our own. This kind of close-quarter recon is the most dangerous job of all. It's lonely and often dull, and fraught with peril should we be discovered. Sometimes, with a particularly valuable terrorist leader, we might go in and get him, trying to yank him out of there alive. Brutal. No mercy. Generally speaking, the Navy SEALs train the best recon units in the world. It always makes me laugh when I read about the proud freedom fighters in Iraq. They're not proud. They'd sell their own mothers for $50. We'd go into some house, grab the guy we believed was the ringleader, march him outside to the street. First thing he'd say was, hey, not me. You want those guys in that house down the street? Or, you give me dollars, I tell you what you want to know. They would and did. And what they told us was very often extremely valuable. Most of those big military coups, like the elimination of Saddam's sons and the capture of Saddam himself, were the result of military intel. Someone from their own side shopped them, as they had shopped hundreds of others. Anything for a buck, right? Pride? Those guys couldn't even spell it. And that grade of intelligence is often hard won. We'd go in fast, driving into the most dangerous districts in the city, screaming through the streets in Humvees, or even fast roping in from helicopters if necessary. We'd advance city block by city block, moving carefully through the dark, ready for someone to open fire on us from a window, a building, somewhere on the opposite side of the street, even a tower. It happened all the time. Sometimes we returned fire, always to much more deadly effect than our enemy could manage. And when we reached our objective, we either go in with sledgehammers and a hoolie. That's a kind of crowbar that will rip a door right off its hinges. Or we'd wrap the demo around the lock and blast that sucker straight in. We always made certain the blast was aimed inward, just in case someone was waiting behind the door with an AK-47. It's hard to survive when a door comes straight at you at 100 miles an hour from point-blank range. Occasionally, if we had an element of doubt about the strength of the opposition behind that door, we would throw in a few flash crashes, which do not explode and knock down walls or anything, but do unleash a series of very loud, almost deafening bangs accompanied by searing white flashes, very disorienting to our enemy. Right then our lead man would head the charge inside the building, which was always a shock for the residents. Even if we had not used the flash crashes, they'd wake up real quick to face a group of big masked men with their machine guns leveled, shouting, daring anyone to make a move. Although these city houses were mostly two-story, Iraqis tend to sleep downstairs, all of them crowded together in the living room. There might be someone upstairs trying to fire down on us, which could be a massive pain in the ass. We usually solve that with a well-aimed hand grenade. That may sound callous, but your teammates were absolutely relying on the colleague with the grenade, because the guy upstairs might also have one, and that danger must be taken out for your teammates. In the SEALs, it's always your teammates, no exceptions. However, in the room downstairs, where the Iraqis were by now in surrender mode, we'd look for the ringleader, the guy who knew where the explosives were stored, the guy who had access to the bomb-making kit or the weapons that would be aimed straight at American soldiers. He was usually not that difficult to find. We'd get some light in there and march him directly to the window so that our guys outside with the intel could compare his face with photographs. Often the photographs had been taken by the team I worked in, and identification was swift. And while this process happened, the SEAL team secured the property, which means, broadly, making darn sure the Iraqis under the sudden house arrest had no access to any form of weaponry whatsoever. Right then, what the SEALs call A guys usually showed up very professional, very steely, steadfast in their requirements and necessary outcome of the interrogation. They cared, above all, about the quality of the informant's information, the priceless data which might save dozens of American lives. Outside, we usually had 3 or 4 SEALs patrolling wide to keep the inevitable gathering crowd at bay. When this was under control, with the A guidance, we would question the ringleader, demanding he inform us where his terrorist cell was operating. Sometimes we would get an address, sometimes names of other ringleaders. Other times a man might inform us about armed dumps. But this usually required money. If the guy we'd arrested was especially stubborn, we'd cuff him, send him back to the base for a more professional interrogation. But usually, he came up with something. That's the way we gathered intelligence. We needed it in order to locate and take out those who would still fight for Saddam Hussein, even if his government had fallen, even if his troops had surrendered, and the country was temporarily under American and British control. These were dangerous days at the conclusion of the formal conflict. Fired on from the rooftops, watching for car bombs, we learned to fight like terrorists, night after night, moving like wild animals through the streets and villages. There is no other way to beat a terrorist. You must fight like him, or he will surely kill you. That's why we went in so hard, taking houses and buildings by storm, blowing the doors in, charging forward, operating strictly by the SEAL team's tried and trusted methods, ingrained in us by our years of training. Because in the end, your enemy must ultimately fear you, understand your supremacy. That's what we were taught, out there in the absolute front line of U.S. military might. That's probably why we never lost one Navy SEAL in all my long months in Iraq, because we played it by the book. No mistakes. At least nothing major. Although I admit in my first week in Iraq, we were subject to, well, a minor lapse in judgment after we found an Iraqi insurgent ammunition dump during a patrol along a river as sporadic shots were fired at us from the other side. There are those military officers who might have considered merely capturing the dump and confiscating the explosive. SEALs react somewhat differently and generally look for a faster solution. It's not quite, hey, this lot's gotta go. But that will do for broad guidelines. We planted our own explosives in the building and then deferred to our EOD guy, Explosive Ordnance Disposal. He positioned us a ways back, but a couple of us did wonder if it was quite far enough. No problem. Stay right where you are, he was confident. Well, that pile of bombs, grenades, and other explosives went up like a nuclear bomb. At first, there was just dust and small bits of concrete flying around. But the blasts grew bigger, and the lumps of concrete from the building started to rain down on us. Guys were diving everywhere, into trucks, under trucks, anywhere to get out of the way. One of our guys jumped into the Tigris. We could hear those rocks and lumps of hard mud walls raining down on us, hitting the trucks. It was amazing no one was killed or hurt out there. Eventually, it all went quiet, and I crawled out unscathed. The EOD maestro was standing right next to me. "Beautiful," I said. "That went really well, didn't it?" I wish Mike Murphy had been there. He'd have come up with something better. We worked for almost 3 months with SEAL Team 5 out in the Baghdad suburbs. That was really where we were blooded for battle. Combing those urban streets, flushing out insurgents wherever they hid. We needed all our skill. Moving up to the corner block, opening fire out there in the night as we rounded these strange, dark foreign street junctions. The trouble was, the places often looked normal, but up close you realized that there were holes straight through the buildings. Some of them just had their front facade, the entire rear area having been blown out by U.S. bombs as the troops fought to run down the murderous Saddam Hussein. Thus, we often found ourselves in what looked like respectable streets, but which were in fact piles of rubble. Perfect hiding places for insurgents or even Sunni Muslim terrorists still fighting for their erstwhile leader. On one such night, I was almost killed. I had moved out onto the sidewalk, my rifle raised, as I fired to provide cover for my teammates. I remember it vividly. I was standing astride a bomb, directly over it. I never even saw it. One of the guys yelled, "Marcus, move!" And he came straight toward me. Hit me with the full force of his body, and the pair of us rolled into the middle of the street. He was first up, literally dragging me away. Moments later, our EOD guys blew it up. Thankfully, we were both now out of range, since it was only a small, improvised explosive made in someone's kitchen. Nevertheless, it would have killed me, or at the very least, inflicted serious damage on my wedding tackle. Thank you, Marcus. I love that line. It was just another example of how amazingly sharp you need to be in order to wear the SEAL Trident. Over and over during training, we were told never to be complacent, reminded constantly of the sheer cunning and unpredictability of our terrorist enemy, and of the necessity for total vigilance at all times, of the endless need to watch out for our teammates. Every night before our mission, one of the senior petty officers would say, "Come on now, guys. Get your game faces on. This is for real. Stay on your toes. Concentrate. That way you'll live." Pretty certain they said it a whole lot louder than I just did. I learned a lot about myself out there with Team 5. Moving through the dark, zigzagging across the ground, never doing anything the same way twice. That's what the Army does. Everything the same way. We operate differently because we are a much smaller force. Even with a major city operation, we never travel in groups of more than 20. And the recon units consist of only 4 people, 4 men. It all causes your senses to go up tenfold as you move quietly, stealthily through the shadows, using the dead space, the areas into which your enemy cannot see. Someone described us as the Shadow Warriors. He was right. That's what we are. And we always have a very clear objective. Usually just one guy. One person who is responsible for making the problem. The terrorist leader or strategist. And there's a whole code of conduct to remember when you finally catch up with him. First of all, make him drop his gun. and get his ass on the ground. He'll usually do that without much protest. Should he decide against this, we help him get on the ground. Quickly. But we never turn around. Even for a split second. We never give these guys 1 inch of latitude. Because he'll pick up that rifle and shoot you at point blank range, straight in the back. He might even cut your throat if he had a chance. No one can hate quite like a terrorist. Until you've encountered one of these guys, you don't understand the meaning of the word hate. We found half-trained terrorists all over the world, mostly unfit to handle a lethal weapon of any kind, especially those Russian-made Kalashnikovs they use. First of all, the damn thing is inaccurate. And in the hands of a hysteric, which most of them are, the gun sprays bullets all over the place. When these guys go after an American, they usually fire blindly around the corner, aiming at nothing in particular, and end up killing 3 passing Iraqi civilians. Only by pure chance do they hit the American soldier they wanted. On May 1st, 2003, President Bush announced military phase of the war was over. 4 days later, it was revealed Saddam and his sons had heisted $1 billion in cash from the central bank. Around that time, with the search for weapons of mass destruction still underway, we were detailed to the gigantic Lake Baharet Tarthar, where supposedly a large cache had been hidden by Saddam. This was a major stretch of water, nearly 50 miles long, and in some places 30 miles wide, set on a flat, verdant plain between the Euphrates and the Tigris, south of the Tikrit. There's a huge dam at one end, and we were stationed just to the south at a place named Hit. Seemed fitting. So we jocked up and combed the deep, clear waters of that lake for about a week, every inch of it. We were operating out of Zodiacs and found nothing except for a bicycle tire and an old ladder. As the weeks went by, the weather grew hotter, sometimes hitting 115 degrees Fahrenheit. We kept going, working away through the nights. There were times when it all seemed to grow calmer. And then on July 4th, a taped voice, which Al Jazeera television said was Saddam, urged everyone to join the resistance and fight the U.S. occupation to the death. We thought that was kind of stupid, because we weren't trying to occupy anything. We were just trying to stop those crazy pricks from blowing up and wiping out the civilian population of the country we had just liberated from one of the biggest bastards in history. Didn't much matter what we thought. The very next day, a serious bomb went off at a graduation ceremony for the new Iraqi police class, trained by the United States. 7 new cops were killed, and 70 more were wounded. God alone understood those to whom that made sense. We continued our operations, looking for key insurgents, forcing or bribing the information out of them, but it already seemed their recruiting numbers were limitless. No matter how many we ran to ground, there were always more. It was around this time we first heard of the rise of this sinister group who called themselves Al-Qaeda in Iraq. It was an undisguised terrorist operation dedicated to mayhem and murder, especially of us. However, the whole movement received a severe blow to its morale on July 22nd, when Saddam's sons, Uday and Qusay, who were at least as evil as their dad, were finally nailed at a house in Mosul. I'm not allowed to speak of this highly classified operation, save to mention the pair of them were killed when U.S. Special Forces flattened the entire building. Their deaths were entirely due to the fact that the couple of their devoted, loyal comrades, full of pride for their fight for freedom, betrayed them for money, just as they would later betray Abu Musab al-Zakari. Despite all our efforts, the suicide bombers just continued. Young Iraqis, convinced by their teachings of the extremist Ayatollahs that the murder of their perceived enemies would open the gates to paradise for them, that the three trumpets would sound and they would cross the bridge into the arms of Allah and everlasting happiness. So they just went right back at it. A bomb killed a U.S. soldier on August 26th, which meant there had now been more U.S. lives lost since the conflict ended than during the battle. On August 29th, a massive car bomb exploded outside a Shiite mosque in Naif and killed 80 people, including the revered and greatly loved Shiite leader Ayatollah Muhammad Baqir al-Hakim. In our opinion, this was rapidly getting out of hand. It seemed no matter what we did, no matter how many of these nuts we rounded up, how much explosives, bombs, or weapons we located, there was always more, and always more young men quite happy to take that shortcut to the trumpets and get right over the bridge and plug into some quality happiness. By now, late August, the questions of the missing WMDs was growing more urgent. Hans Blix of the United Nations Chief Weapons Inspector had retired from public life, and the U.S. Armed Forces were now keeping careful watch. In our view, the question of whether Saddam Hussein had biological and chemical weapons was answered. Of course he did. He used them in Halabja. I'm going to mangle this word. Halabaha, right? I guess by now the issue in the minds of the American public was, did he have a nuclear weapon, an atom bomb? But of course, that is not the most significant question. The one that counts is, did he have a nuclear program? Because that would mean he was trying to produce weapons-grade uranium-235. You get that from using a centrifuge to spin uranium-238, thus driving the heavy neutrons outward. Like water off a lettuce in a salad spinner. It's a hell of a process and takes up to 7 years, at which time, if you've had a trouble-free run, you cut off the outside edges of the uranium, and there you have a large chunk of a heavy molecule, uranium-235. Cut that in half, and then slam the two pieces together by high explosives in a confined steel space like a rocket or a bomb, and right there, it's Hiroshima all over again. And that's the issue. Was Saddam spinning for uranium-235? And if so, did he get the uranium in the where did he get the uranium in the first place? And where was he conducting his program? Remember, there was no other reason on this earth to want uranium-235 except to make an atom bomb. We knew the American intelligence agencies believed he had such programs, that somewhere in his vast country It's bigger than Germany, nearly as big as Texas. There were centrifuges trying to manufacture the world's most dangerous substance. That was all of the information we had. But we knew what to look for, and we most certainly would have recognized it if we had found it. Did Saddam actually own the completed article? A finely tuned atom bomb or missile? Probably not. No one ever thought he did. But as former Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld once remarked, what do you want to do? Leave him there until he does? You may remember the CIA believed they had uncovered critical evidence from the satellite pictures of those enormous government trucks rolling along Iraq's highways, 4 of them, usually in convoy, and all big enough to house 2 centrifuges. The accepted opinion was that Saddam had a mobile spinning program which could not easily be found, and in fact could be either lost and buried in the desert or alternatively driven across the border into Syria or Jordan. Well, we found those trucks hidden in the desert, parked together, but the inside of each one had been roughly gutted. There was nothing left. We saw the trucks, and in my opinion, someone had removed whatever they had contained in a very great hurry. I also saw the Al-Qaeda training camp north of Baghdad that had been abandoned, but it was stark evidence of the strong links between the Iraqi dictator and Osama bin Laden's would-be warriors. Traces of the camp's military purpose were all around. Some of the guys who had been in Afghanistan said it was just about a direct replica of the camp the United States destroyed after 9/11. Because I didn't realize how long this chapter was going to be, and I'm already running over an hour. I'm going to stop here. I'm at the very end of a paragraph. I'm probably only a couple of pages away from the end of the chapter. If you'd like to read more about this book, the book is entitled Lone Survivor. Personally, I think it's a great book. Brings back some memories for me. Some I wish I didn't have, and some I'm glad I do. Hopefully, I'll see you again. As always, long lives, big bowls, and long ashes. Talk to you soon.